What if I told you that the most heroic character in all of Westeros isn't Jon Snow? What if the greatest underdog story in George R. R. Martin's universe happened nearly a century before Game of Thrones even began? Today, we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating comparisons in the entire Song of Ice and Fire saga: Ser Duncan the Tall versus Jon Snow. Two bastards, two outsiders, two men who rose from nothing to become legends. But only one truly embodies the purest form of heroism in Westeros. Before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we're about to unpack some serious Westerosi lore that will completely change how you view the Game of Thrones universe. Let's start at the very beginning. Both Duncan the Tall and Jon Snow share remarkably similar origins, yet their paths diverge in fascinating ways that reveal something profound about what it means to be a true hero. Ser Duncan the Tall, born simply as Dunk, was an orphan from Flea Bottom, the most impoverished and dangerous district of King's Landing. He doesn't even remember how he got his name. No parents, no family, no legacy, just a street urchin trying to survive in the underbelly of the capital. At around 5 or 6 years old, he was taken in by Sir Arlan of Pennytree, a wandering hedge knight with no lands, no wealth, and very little prestige. Dunk learned the basics of knighthood from Sir Arlan, but this wasn't some grand training montage with castle walls and pristine training yards. This was rough, practical education on the road, scraping by from tourney to tourney. When Sir Arlan died on the way to the tourney at Ashford Meadow, young Dunk found himself utterly alone. He was roughly 16 years old, with nothing but a dead man's armor, a couple of horses, and a dream that probably seemed impossible: to become a true knight. The key detail here? There's substantial doubt in the text about whether Sir Arlan actually knighted Dunk before his death. Dunk may have literally lied about being a knight. He's potentially a fraud from day one. Jon Snow, by contrast, had a significantly more privileged upbringing, despite his bastard status. Yes, he suffered the stigma of illegitimacy. Yes, Catelyn Stark treated him coldly and made him feel like an outsider in his own home. But let's be real. Jon was raised in Winterfell, one of the great castles of Westeros. He was trained by a master at arms. He learned to read and write. He had siblings who loved him, especially Robb and Arya. He had Ned Stark as a father figure, instilling in him honor, duty, and the ways of leadership. Jon ate well, slept in a warm bed, and received an education that 99% of Westeros could never dream of. When Jon joined the Night's Watch at 14, he did so with skills that far exceeded his fellow recruits. He was so much better than them that he earned the mocking nickname Lord Snow, because he carried himself with the arrogance of nobility. It took Donal Noye calling him out for Jon to recognize his privilege and start actually helping his brothers, rather than looking down on them. The comparison: Duncan started with absolutely nothing. No name, no family, no training to speak of, and possibly not even legitimate knighthood. Jon started with almost everything except a last name and his mother's identity. From the very beginning, Duncan is the true underdog. He's a nobody trying to become somebody in a world that actively works against people like him. Here's where things get really interesting. Both men are considered honorable, but the nature of their honor reveals fundamentally different characters. Duncan the Tall embodies a naive, almost Don Quixote-like idealism about knighthood. He genuinely believes that knights exist to protect the innocent, defend the weak, and uphold justice. When he sees Prince Aerion Brightflame, a member of the royal family, assaulting a puppeteer named Tansel for the crime of depicting a dragon dying in her puppet show, Duncan doesn't hesitate. He doesn't calculate the political ramifications. He doesn't think about his own survival. He simply walks up to a prince of the blood and punches him so hard he knocks out one of Aerion's teeth. This is insane. This is borderline suicidal. Every rational person in that crowd thought Duncan had just signed his own death warrant. But here's the thing. Duncan couldn't not act. His sense of right and wrong, his idealized vision of what a knight should be, wouldn't allow him to stand by while a woman was being hurt. Even though he's thick as a castle wall by his own admission, even though he's not particularly clever or politically savvy, Duncan has something that many smarter, more skilled knights lack: an unshakable moral compass that points true north regardless of consequences. This pattern repeats throughout Duncan's adventures. In The Sworn Sword, he serves Sir Eustace Osgrey, a minor lord involved in a water rights dispute with the formidable Lady Rohan Webber. When Duncan learns that Sir Eustace was a traitor during the Blackfyre Rebellion, he immediately prepares to leave his service. He cannot serve someone who betrayed his king, even though leaving means poverty and uncertainty. When violence threatens to break out, Duncan doesn't scheme or plot. He offers his own blood to pay the debt for an injured peasant, literally cutting his own cheek. His solutions are direct, honest, and rooted in a simple understanding of justice that sophisticated nobles often find baffling. Jon Snow, while certainly honorable, operates with more calculation and pragmatism. His honor is inherited from Ned Stark, yes, but Jon consistently shows political awareness that Duncan lacks. When Jon infiltrates the wildlings, he breaks his Night's Watch vows by sleeping with Ygritte, justifying it as necessary for his mission. When Jon becomes Lord Commander, he makes controversial decisions like allowing the wildlings south of the Wall, decisions that are strategically sound but politically dangerous. He understands power dynamics, builds alliances, and sometimes makes morally gray choices for what he believes is the greater good. Jon's defining moment isn't punching a prince for hurting a commoner, it's executing Janos Slint for insubordination, or making peace with traditional enemies, or navigating the complex politics of the Night's Watch. These are the actions of a leader and strategist. They're admirable, certainly heroic in their own right, but they come from a place of educated decision-making rather than pure, almost childlike idealism. The comparison. Duncan is heroic because he doesn't know how to be anything else. His heroism is instinctive, unthinking, and absolute. Jon is heroic because he chooses to be, often despite knowing the costs. Duncan is the ideal, Jon is the reality. And while Jon may be more realistic, there's something profoundly moving about Duncan's uncompromising vision of what a knight should be. Now let's talk about one of the most fascinating parallels between these two characters, their hidden royal connections, and what those connections mean for their stories. Jon Snow's entire narrative arc in Game of Thrones becomes increasingly focused on his secret parentage. The revelation that he's actually Aegon Targaryen, the legitimate son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, transforms him from bastard to the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. This twist recontextualizes everything about Jon's character. Suddenly, his ability to unite people, his natural leadership, his connection to dragons through Daenerys, it all makes sense because he has royal blood. He's special because of who his parents were. This is a classic fantasy trope, the hidden prince, the secret king, the chosen one whose greatness was always inevitable due to bloodline. It's the same pattern we see in Star Wars with Luke Skywalker, in Harry Potter with, well, Harry Potter, and in countless other fantasy narratives. There's nothing wrong with this trope, it's popular for a reason, but it does somewhat undermine the underdog narrative. Jon isn't really an underdog if he was always secretly the most legitimate claimant to the throne. His struggles, while real, were always building toward a revelation that would explain his specialness. Duncan the Tall's story inverts this trope in a fascinating way. While Duncan travels with Egg, who is secretly Prince Aegon Targaryen, the future King Aegon V, Duncan himself never gets a secret royal heritage reveal. He remains, throughout his entire story, exactly what he appears to be, a commoner, possibly not even a legitimate knight, who rose to greatness through nothing but his own merit and character. Yes, Duncan eventually becomes Lord Commander of the Kingsguard under King Aegon V, his former squire. But he achieves this position not because of bloodline or destiny, but because Aegon knows Duncan's character. Aegon, who traveled with Duncan and saw how he treated common people, how he defended the weak, how he struggled with his own limitations, but never compromised his principles. Aegon chose Duncan because Duncan represented everything a knight should be, not because of any prophecy or hidden heritage. There's a beautiful irony here. Duncan, the probable fraud knight from Flea Bottom, becomes one of the most legendary members of the Kingsguard. Jon, the supposed bastard, turns out to have the most legitimate claim to power in the realm. Duncan earns his legacy, Jon discovers his. George R.R. Martin himself has suggested that Duncan the Tall is an ancestor of Brienne of Tarth, which would give Duncan a legacy, but it's a legacy built entirely on his deeds and character, not on claims to thrones or ancient bloodlines. Duncan's specialness comes from his choices, not his chromosomes. The comparison. Jon's story increasingly becomes about discovering who he really is. Duncan's story is about becoming who he chooses to be. One is about revelation, the other is about creation. And in terms of pure underdog narrative, Duncan wins this round decisively. He has no safety net of secret royalty to catch him. His greatness is entirely self-made. Let's address something crucial. Neither Duncan nor Jon are the most skilled warriors in their respective stories, but the way they handle their limitations reveals everything about their characters. Duncan the Tall is described as thick as a castle wall and slow as an aurochs by Sir Arlan. He's not a natural genius with a sword. At the Ashford tourney, Duncan isn't exceptional in the lists. He barely makes it through. His size and strength are his primary advantages, but technique, strategy, Duncan is decidedly average at best. When he faces the trial of 7, he survives more through determination and the help of his champions than through superior skill. But here's what makes Duncan remarkable. He gets better. Throughout the Duncan Egg stories, we see Duncan steadily improving, learning from every fight, every mistake. By the time he becomes Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Duncan has transformed himself from a barely competent hedge knight into a legendary warrior. This transformation happens over decades through constant effort, practice, and accumulated experience. Duncan earns every ounce of his reputation. Moreover, Duncan's physical presence is unique in Westeros. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, he's literally larger than life. But Martin uses Duncan's size not to make him overpowered, but to emphasize how even natural advantages must be paired with character. Plenty of large, strong men exist in Westeros. What makes Duncan special isn't his height, it's what he does with it. He uses his strength to defend the helpless, not to dominate them. Jon Snow is repeatedly described as an excellent swordsman, trained by a master-at-arms at Winterfell. His skill is above average from the start, and his warg connection with Ghost gives him abilities that border on supernatural. As the series progresses, Jon becomes an increasingly formidable warrior and commander. He leads successful defenses, wins crucial battles, and earns respect through his combat prowess. Jon also benefits from his warging abilities. His connection to Ghost provides him with enhanced awareness and even survives his assassination because his consciousness can live on in his direwolf. In the books, this is heavily implied for his resurrection. These supernatural elements, while fascinating, do separate Jon from the pure, everyman hero archetype. When Jon faces challenges, he typically has resources to draw upon: his training, his connections, his growing legend, and increasingly, his revealed heritage. This doesn't diminish his accomplishments, but it does mean he's working with a fuller toolkit than Duncan ever possessed. The comparison. Duncan represents the absolute triumph of perseverance over natural limitations. He's proof that someone with average skills and below average intelligence can become legendary through unwavering dedication to principles. Jon represents what happens when natural talent meets opportunity and education. Both are heroic, but Duncan's journey from incompetent to legendary is the more dramatic transformation. He's Rocky Balboa, Jon is Captain America. Both are heroes, but one started with super soldier serum, and the other just had heart. Heroes are often defined by their relationships, and both Duncan and Jon form pivotal partnerships that shape their stories. But these partnerships reveal fundamentally different approaches to heroism. Duncan and Egg. This is one of the most beautiful friendships in all of Westeros. Duncan takes on a bald boy he believes to be an orphan from Flea Bottom, just like himself. When he discovers that Egg is actually Prince Aegon Targaryen, Duncan is horrified, not because he's been deceived, but because he's been treating a prince like a common squire, making him do menial tasks and sleep on the ground. But Egg doesn't want special treatment. He chose Duncan specifically because Duncan treated him like a person, not a prince. Their relationship is built on genuine mutual respect and affection that crosses every social boundary Westeros recognizes. Duncan teaches Egg about the common people, about hardship, about the reality of life outside castle walls. Egg provides Duncan with friendship and, eventually, with elevation to the highest ranks of knighthood. What's crucial here is that Duncan never tries to use his relationship with Egg for personal gain. Even when it would solve his problems, even when acknowledging Egg's identity would protect him, Duncan consistently tries to keep Egg's secret and treats him as a squire first. Duncan's loyalty isn't transactional, it's absolute. The other relationships Duncan forms, with Tansel Too Tall, with Lady Rohan Weber, with various knights he meets, are all characterized by Duncan's fundamental decency. He falls in love but never presumes. He makes friends across class lines. He earns respect not through manipulation or political maneuvering, but through consistent demonstration of his values. Jon and his relationships, Jon's most significant relationships, with Sam, Ygritte, Daenerys, are more complex and often more troubled. His friendship with Sam is genuine and touching, but it's also between two members of the Night's Watch, where Jon increasingly becomes Sam's superior officer. His relationship with Ygritte is passionate, but built on deception. He's infiltrating her people. His relationship with Daenerys becomes romantic and political simultaneously, ultimately ending in tragedy when Jon kills her. Jon's relationships often serve narrative functions beyond simple friendship. Sam is his loyal advocate. Ygritte teaches him about the wildlings. Daenerys represents alliance and power. These relationships are deep and meaningful, but they're also strategic in ways that Duncan's relationships never are. This isn't a criticism of Jon, it's a reality of his position. As Lord Commander and eventually King in the North, Jon's relationships carry political weight. Duncan, as a hedge knight and later Kingsguard, has more freedom to form relationships based purely on personal connection. The comparison. Duncan's relationships are characterized by simplicity and purity of purpose. Jon's relationships are necessarily more complex and compromised by his position and responsibilities. Duncan's greatest relationship, with Egg, elevates both men without corrupting either. It's a model of what friendship across class lines can be. Jon's relationships, while powerful, often carry costs and complications that Duncan's do not. Now we arrive at perhaps the most important distinction between these two characters: the nature of their heroism and the agency they possess in their own stories. Jon Snow operates increasingly within the framework of prophecy and destiny. He's the prince that was promised, possibly. He's Azor Ahai reborn, maybe. He's the Song of Ice and Fire, according to some interpretations. Even his resurrection, coming back from death, places him in a category beyond normal human experience. Jon becomes special in ways that transcend choice. The television adaptation of Game of Thrones makes this even more explicit. Jon is chosen to unite humanity against the White Walkers. He's literally resurrected by the Lord of Light for a purpose. His royal heritage is revealed to position him as the true king. At every turn, Jon's story suggests that he's special because of forces beyond his control: his bloodline, prophecies made before his birth, divine intervention. This creates a fascinating tension in Jon's character. On one hand, he's making choices and facing consequences. On the other hand, there's an increasing sense that Jon was always meant for greatness, that his path was in some sense predetermined. When Jon achieves something remarkable, we're left wondering, is this Jon's triumph, or is this destiny unfolding as it must? Even Jon's most crucial choice in the show, killing Daenerys, happens in a way that feels forced by narrative necessity rather than emerging organically from his character. Jon does the right thing, but it doesn't feel entirely like his choice. It feels like the choice the story requires of him. Duncan the Tall exists in a completely different narrative framework. There are no prophecies about Duncan. No gods resurrect him. No hidden bloodline explains his success. Duncan is remarkable for one reason and one reason only: he chooses to be. Every single heroic act Duncan performs is a choice he makes in the moment, often against his own self-interest. When he defends Tansel, he's choosing principle over safety. When he offers his blood to Lady Rohan, he's choosing peace over pride. When he remains loyal to Egg even after learning his true identity, he's choosing friendship over political advantage. Duncan's entire arc is about a man who decides what kind of person he wants to be and then becomes that person through sheer force of will and consistency of action. He's not chosen by prophecy. He's not destined for greatness. He makes himself great through thousands of small choices to do the right thing, even when it's difficult, even when it costs him. When Duncan eventually becomes Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, it's not because ancient prophecies foretold it. It's because King Aegon V, who spent years traveling with Duncan, recognized his character and chose to elevate him. Duncan's success is the result of human recognition of human virtue, not cosmic destiny. This is why Duncan's story is ultimately more powerful as an underdog narrative. Jon's story says, even if you think you're nothing, you might secretly be everything. Duncan's story says, even if you are nothing, you can make yourself into something through your choices and character. Both men's stories end in tragedy, but the nature of these tragedies further illuminates the differences between them. Jon Snow's ending, in the show at least, the books remain unfinished, is controversial and debated to this day. After killing Daenerys to prevent further destruction, Jon is exiled back to the Night's Watch, essentially ending where he began. He walks north of the Wall with the wildlings and Ghost in a scene that's either poetic circularity or narrative wheel spinning, depending on your perspective. The tragedy of Jon's ending is that after everything, the revelations, the resurrections, the battles, he ends up essentially negating his own journey. He gives up his claim, kills his love, and returns to exile. It's meant to be noble sacrifice, but it feels hollow. Jon's ending suggests that all his specialness, all his destiny, amounts to going back north. The prince that was promised becomes the ranger who remains. Moreover, Jon's ending is imposed upon him by others. Tyrion convinces him to kill Daenerys. Grey Worm and the Unsullied demand justice. The lords of Westeros decide his fate. Even in his final act of heroism, Jon has limited agency. He's reacting to circumstances rather than forging his own path. Duncan the Tall's death, by contrast, is the ultimate expression of his character. During the tragedy at Summerhall, a catastrophic fire that killed multiple members of the royal family, Duncan died trying to save others. The exact details remain mysterious, but the core fact is clear. Duncan, even at the end, even as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, died doing what he always did, trying to protect people. There's something perfect about Duncan's end. He doesn't die in glory on a battlefield with songs being sung. He dies doing his duty, trying to save lives in a disaster. It's not glamorous, it's not prophesied, it's just Duncan being Duncan until his very last breath. And here's the beautiful thing. Duncan's legacy continues not through prophecy or destiny, but through the people he influenced. King Aegon V's reforms to protect common folk were directly influenced by his years traveling with Duncan. Duncan's probable descendant, Brienne of Tarth, carries forward his ideals of true knighthood. Duncan's impact on Westeros isn't magical or mystical. It's the ripple effects of one good man living according to his principles. The comparison. Jon's tragedy is that destiny and circumstance ultimately define him more than his choices. Duncan's tragedy is that a genuinely good man died too soon, but his tragedy is also his triumph. He died as he lived, trying to protect others. Jon's ending asks us to believe that going in circles is somehow meaningful. Duncan's ending shows us that a life lived with purpose and principle is meaningful regardless of where it ends. So after examining their origins, their character, their relationships, their agency, and their ends, who is the real underdog hero of Westeros? The answer, perhaps surprisingly, is clearly Ser Duncan the Tall. Don't misunderstand. Jon Snow is a compelling character and a hero in his own right. His struggles are real, his growth is significant, and his choices matter. Jon represents what happens when an outsider discovers they were always meant for something greater. His story resonates with millions because it taps into the fantasy that we might all be secretly special. But Duncan? Duncan is special precisely because he's not secretly anything. He's an orphan who stayed an orphan. A possible fraud who became a legend anyway. A man with average intelligence and mediocre skills who became one of the greatest knights in Westerosi history through nothing but consistent character and unwavering principles. Duncan embodies the purest form of the underdog archetype. He succeeds without secret royal heritage, prophesied destiny, supernatural abilities, elite education or training, political connections or advantages, divine intervention or resurrection. Everything Duncan achieves, he achieves through choice. Every heroic act is a decision to be better than circumstances suggest he should be. Every advancement in his career comes from demonstrating his character, not from revealing hidden specialness. Moreover, Duncan's heroism is more accessible, more replicable. Jon's story teaches us that we should hope for secret greatness within ourselves. Duncan's story teaches us that we can choose greatness through our actions, regardless of our birth or circumstances. Understanding Duncan as the true underdog hero of Westeros isn't just academic nitpicking. It reveals something profound about George R.R. Martin's storytelling evolution and what makes truly compelling fantasy. The Dunk and Egg novellas were written after A Game of Thrones, but set nearly a century before it. In some ways, they represent Martin's response to his own main series. If A Song of Ice and Fire is about the corruption and complexity of power, about how good people can be destroyed by the systems they inhabit, then Tales of Dunk and Egg is about something simpler and perhaps more powerful. One person can make a difference through consistent decency. Game of Thrones often wallows in moral ambiguity, and that's part of its appeal. But there's something refreshing about Duncan's straightforward morality. He's not morally gray, he's morally clear. And he succeeds not despite this clarity, but because of it. In a world of political maneuvering and shifting loyalties, Duncan's constancy becomes his superpower. The upcoming HBO series, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, The Hedge Knight, will introduce Duncan to mainstream audiences who only know the Game of Thrones show, and I predict many viewers will be surprised by how different Duncan's story feels. There are no White Walkers, no dragons. Well, they exist but play no major role, no massive armies clashing. Instead, it's about a man trying to be good in a world that doesn't make goodness easy. This is why Duncan matters. He proves that heroism doesn't require prophecy or special bloodlines. He's the hero we can actually aspire to be, not because we might discover we're secretly special, but because we can choose, every day to be better than our circumstances suggest we should be. Let me leave you with this final thought. When we talk about the heroes of Westeros, we often focus on the dramatic, the prophesied, the spectacular. We celebrate Jon Snow for his royal heritage, Daenerys for her dragons, Arya for her supernatural assassination skills. But Ser Duncan the Tall, thick-headed, slow-witted, possibly fraudulent Duncan, represents something that fantasy literature often struggles to capture: the heroism of ordinary decency consistently applied. Duncan never saved the world from an apocalyptic threat. He never claimed a throne or united kingdoms. He didn't fulfill ancient prophecies or command armies. Instead, he defended a puppeteer from a cruel prince. He paid a debt with his own blood to prevent violence. He treated a prince like a person. He remained loyal when disloyalty would have been easier. He protected the weak, even when they couldn't repay him. And through these small, consistent acts of heroism, Duncan changed Westeros more fundamentally than many characters who accomplished greater feats. His influence on King Aegon V led to reforms that improved countless lives. His example inspired future generations of knights. His basic decency in a cynical world proved that honor isn't naive, it's necessary. Jon Snow will always be more famous. His story is more dramatic, more cinematic, more aligned with traditional Chosen One narratives. But Duncan the Tall is the real underdog hero of Westeros because he represents a truth that's more powerful than any prophecy. You don't need to be chosen to be a hero, you just need to choose to be one. So the next time someone asks you about the greatest heroes in Game of Thrones, tell them about the nearly 7-foot-tall hedge knight from Flea Bottom, who probably wasn't even really a knight, who had average skills and below-average brains, but who became a legend anyway because he refused to be anything less than what a knight should be. That's Ser Duncan the Tall. That's the real underdog. That's the real hero. Thanks for watching, everyone. Let me know in the comments whether you agree. Is Duncan the true underdog, or does Jon Snow still hold that title in your eyes? And if you're excited about the upcoming Knight of the Seven Kingdoms series, drop a comment about what Duncan and Egg story you're most excited to see adapted. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into the world of Ice and Fire. Until next time, remember, be like Duncan. Choose to be a hero.